Hello, I'm Richard Kauntze, Chief Executive of the British Council for Offices, the BCO, and welcome to the latest in our series of interviews we call The New Normal. Now, this week's theme brings together the BCO's NextGen membership, that's those members who are 35 and under, and the legal profession. And I'm delighted to be able to say that my guest to talk about both of those themes is Lindsey Barrett. So welcome, Lindsey.
Hi, Richard. Hi, nice to be with you.
Hi, Lindsey. Very good to have you with us, and thank you very much for joining us. Now, for those who may not know, Lindsey is a solicitor and trained at Nabarra Nathanson, qualifying into real estate in 2008, and worked there as an associate and a senior associate. In 2017, she transferred to CMS following its merger with Nabarro and Olswang, and was promoted to partner last year. So congratulations on that, Lindsey. Now, based in the CMS London office, Lindsey's work includes acquisitions and disposals, development and asset management, and she advises both landlords and tenants. Now, in BCO terms, Lindsey sits on our membership committee as a NextGen representative and has held a seat on the NextGen Committee since 2013. And she has just been appointed as the new chair of the London NextGen Group. So congratulations on that as well, Lindsey. And now also has a seat on our management executive and board. So thanks again, Lindsey, for joining us. I'm very grateful to you. And let's jump straight to questions, if I may. And I'll start with the NextGen. Now, what are your ambitions, Lindsey, as the new chair of the London NextGen Committee?
So yeah, thanks, Richard. As you said, I joined the NextGen Committee back in 2013, and at the time our membership numbers were about 170, 180, and we peaked last year with NextGen membership at 950. So obviously that's great growth in a short period of time, and I'm obviously really keen as the new chairperson to continue with that. Now, in the short term, given the circumstances that we're in, my focus has obviously been on making sure that the NextGen community feel connected and continuing to communicate with them as well as we can. So we've been very pleased to continue with the Inspirational Leaders series. We've been able to do that with webinars. We had Simon Alford and Simon Silver do one a couple of weeks ago, and this week we've got Roger Madeline. So that's been great to be able to share not just with our members, but with non-members as well, so you can watch it through the YouTube channel. We've also continued the mentoring scheme during lockdown, which I think has been incredibly important. I think at the last count we had over 40 senior industry people as mentors, and for NextGen members that's a great opportunity, and I'm really pleased that that's been able to continue during this time. Obviously, looking forward, I'm hoping we're going to go back to a normality again. My ambition is to bring back a more normal timetable of events. Building tours have always been very popular. Lots of interviews and seminars, and we need to continue with webinars, and great. But also, I'm really excited about our 5th BCO NextGen Awards ceremony, which is coming up in November. Although that will be a virtual event, but continuing with those sorts of things. But also, we're in a period of real change in the office sector, and so making sure that NextGen members' voice is heard, and that we're there to challenge the way that we've always done things.
Thanks. It's a fantastic offer, and I think it's important to remember. I mean, that you mentioned the growth, and it's staggering. The NextGen membership is now almost exactly a quarter of the entire BCO membership, which is a stunning achievement, and sort of maintaining the quality of the offer in these very challenging times is a very impressive achievement. So my congratulations to you and all your colleagues on working so hard on that. I'd like to jump next, if I may, to careers. And if you were to speak, Lindsey, to a young graduate today, why would you recommend a career in the office sector?
Well, I'd absolutely say if people are considering it, go for it. You know, what's great about the office sector is you can play to your strengths. There's lots of different options. So there's agency, engineers, cost consultants, architects, even lawyers. So I definitely say go for it. You know, it's an exciting sector to be involved in. I've been very lucky. I've been able to lead on a number of city office pre-lets, and it's great to be part of that team who are delivering just fantastic workspace. And there is nothing like going to a topping out or an opening ceremony of a building that you've worked on and seeing that whole team of people who've come together to make that happen and deliver that space. So I'd certainly say, get involved, be a part of it. But also, it's changing. It never stands still. You know, we've seen the office change a huge amount, even in just the last few years. And coming out of this pandemic, we're going to see it change a lot more. There's lots of discussion at the moment about how the office is going to change. And to be a part of that is really exciting. There's a lot of discussion at the moment about, is the office dead? Will there be an office sector? Absolutely, the office isn't dead, in my opinion. People are enjoying working from home. They can see the positives of it. They can obviously see the positives of not having a commute. But actually, on the whole, and we've seen from the surveys that come out, between 60 and 80% of people do want to work more from home. But actually, people are desperate to come back to the office, I think. We thought at the beginning of lockdown this would be a few weeks. It's turned out it's not. We're sitting here a few months later and we're all still at home. And personally speaking, I'd love to go into the office, see my colleagues, and actually stop looking around my house at all the things that need doing and the ever-growing pile of washing, and actually just have that separation between office and work and home. And definitely that flexibility, I think we'll see more and more. The next generation certainly want that flexibility, that ability to balance work life, home life. And so it's going to be a really interesting time, I think, of change. And what will we see from that? I think there may be this emergence, or certainly a rebirth of business parks. So outside of the city, will people want to commute? Because unless you can really properly work on a train or a tube, which is very difficult, particularly going into London, people are noticing that 1, 2, 3 hours a day is a bit of wasted time, and they're getting that back by working at home. So to balance that with that not wanting to commute with wanting to be in the office, will we see business parks where they have lots of car parking space and the ability to maybe even walk to the office? I think that it would be a very attractive proposition. And the other piece that I think would be very interesting, and I think graduates will see more as they come into the office sector, is the co-working and the flexible workspace. Now, obviously, they've got some challenges at the moment with the density issue and the fact that social distancing guidelines and what they're going to have to bring in. But if they can weather the short-term storm, I think there's a lot of potential long-term for people wanting to use that. People will be looking at their office take and thinking, do we need that much space when people are working from home so much? So maybe there's potential there for people to be going more into flexible workspace. We don't know.
Thanks, Izzy. Now, unsurprisingly, as someone who spent his entire career in property and a big chunk of that focusing on offices, I absolutely champion the excitement and interest which this sector presents, and the office, of course, as you've well articulated, has a great future, and that's been a constant theme in this interview. But I want to move on next, if I may, to how we can attract the best talent to the sector. Now, diversity, understandably, is a big theme at the moment for all kinds of reasons, and the legal profession has changed very significantly in recent years, not least in having far more women represented in the profession. But what more does the legal world and the other professions, and you mentioned many of them just a minute ago, need to do to encourage greater diversity across the board?
So yeah, as you say, Richard, we have made great strides in terms of gender diversity, particularly in the legal industry. Now looking at entry level, there's about 60% to 40% female to male ratio, at entry level. So as you go into seniority, that is going to change. The numbers of female partners are going to increase. So that's been great, and that's been helped by a few different things. The introduction of shared parental leave, I think, has been a big one, and that was back in December 2014, which allows men and women, they have a baby or adopt a child, to share up to 50 weeks of leave. And so when my husband and I did that back in 2016 when our daughter was born, it allowed me to go back to work earlier than I may have done, and him to take over the childcare responsibility. And that's been great in allowing people, I think it's not an automatic assumption now that a woman will have an extended period. A man can do that as well. So that's been great. Still, under 5% of people take that up. So I think there still needs to be a cultural shift to increase the popularity of that. But it's a start. Flexible working, I think, has also been really important, as we've talked about. That's becoming more and more popular. Post lockdown in this pandemic, it's certainly going to be more popular. That allows people to have a better work-life balance, to be more flexible in how they work, and I think that's really important in helping everybody, really. And that's gender diversity, and it's great. We've got more to do, but it's been great. But actually, I think now we need to focus on BAME and LGBT communities and how we increase their representation in our sector, and that's important. And I think that comes from obviously equal opportunities. We've tried things at CMS, blind interviewing is one example, where you don't know people's age before when we're looking at applications and before we interview them, and that's really important. Strong role models is really important to prove that you can be successful, and there are opportunities there for you from those groups. So all of that, I think, is helping, and there's a lot more to do. We certainly can't take our eye off it, and it's certainly part of all of our agendas to make sure that we are focusing on diversity and better representation.
Thank you, Lindsey. I'd like to move on next, if I may, to the coronavirus pandemic. Specifically, we've touched upon it a bit earlier in this interview, but that is obviously the underlying theme for the whole series. And you've looked at some of these points before, but perhaps in a bit more detail, Lindsey, what impact do you think the pandemic is having at the moment immediately on the office sector?
So when we first went into lockdown, obviously I think people thought, as I said, it was going to be for a few weeks, and so a lot of big deals were put on hold. People had a bit of a wait and see mentality, because we thought, right, we can just get through the next few weeks, we'll all be back to normal soon, and it will be fine. Obviously, a few months on, we know that isn't the case, and so obviously activity levels are down, office take-up is down. We have still seen some big deals. At CMS, we've been involved in the GP Exane pre-let, the sale of 20 Farringdon Street for HP Reba. So there are still things happening, great comfort, I think, but obviously activity levels are down, particularly around investment. So last year, 75% of the investment into the UK property was from overseas. And so that's going to have taken a hit with all the various lockdown situations, everything happening worldwide, but also obviously the travel restrictions and people not being able to visit and view buildings, the investment market. So what we're seeing is more, sort of less investment activity, less activity generally, but more activity on obviously the management side, so asset management, that's still continuing, tenants still take space, landlords obviously still want to fill their voids, and so we're seeing management work continuing. A piece at the moment is to do with landlord-tenant relationships, and that, how that's working and how that might change. That, I think, is really a big issue in the office sector at the moment. And I think looking forward, we've talked a bit about how this will change the market community. So talking about will we see more satellite offices? Will we see offices in the suburbs? Will we see business parks becoming more popular again? And as we've talked about as well, co-working, flexible workspace, the kind of long-term view for that. And as we've all been talking about for months, what will the office look like? I completely agree with you, Richard. I don't think the office will disappear. I think that is the hub of where we want to work. We like the flexibility. There is nothing like being in the office with our colleagues, and so I think that will definitely continue, but it will just look a bit different.
Now, you just mentioned, Lindsey, landlords, and I'd like to turn to that for my penultimate question specifically, if I may. Now, what sort of questions are landlords asking you at the moment, Lindsey? And do you think they're getting a fair deal during the crisis so far?
Yes, as we say, we are looking at a lot of landlord and tenant issues at the moment. The big question, obviously, is around rent recovery and rent deferrals, and holidays. So initially, when we went into lockdown and obviously shops were closed and people had to work from home, landlords were really concerned about, well, can tenants stop paying rent? So do they still have their rental obligations? Obviously, tenants' concerns were, can I stop paying my rent? Am I allowed a rent holiday? And obviously, the response is in the terms of the documentation, but generally, tenants still are obliged to pay their rent. The pandemic is not an insured risk. There aren't any rent assessors in place, so they're having to pay. Now, they've been helped, obviously, by the moratorium on forfeiture that the government has brought in. That ends on the 30th of June, and at the moment we've had no confirmation as to whether that's going to be extended or not. And so that's going to be an interesting time as to, okay, you haven't had to necessarily pay, or we've had to pay March rent, but you haven't, because you haven't got this risk of forfeiture of your lease hanging over your head. But now June quarter's payment is due, and the moratorium may be disappearing. So actually, that's when I think we're going to see a real pinch point of whether tenants are able to pay. And so, because of this moratorium being in place, landlords are asking us, well, what else can I do? What other options do I have? And so, landlords can still issue stat demands as precursors to insolvency proceedings. They can we've been looking at, obviously, whether we can claim against guarantors, draw down from rent deposits, those sorts of things. But obviously, landlords have to be really strategic in what they're doing and how they're acting with these tenants, because there may just not be the money there. It doesn't matter. You can issue as many stat demands as you want and make as many threats as you want, but if the tenants don't have the cash, you're throwing bad money after good. So landlords are having to look at their tenants and really strategically choose which ones they're pursuing, which ones they're not. We've obviously had a lot of requests from tenants for rent deferrals, rent holidays. So a lot of what we're doing at the moment is documenting that sort of arrangement. Now, when it comes to the retail tenants, landlords have a bit more sympathy and are willing to enter into those conversations to ease the pain, particularly, certainly in the short term. The office tenants aren't getting as much sympathy from the landlords, just because we've all proved we can work from home. The businesses can continue to run, okay, maybe not on the levels they were, but therefore landlords, I think the office tenants have had a bit of a rough ride, because landlords just aren't as amenable to those sort of arrangements with them. But whether landlords have been supported enough is a very good question. There's nothing in the Coronavirus Act that bans any sort of claim against landlords during this period. And so, they haven't had that much help. And obviously their real concern is, can they get their rented income in? But also, that's a real issue if your property's charged. If you've got a facility agreement with banks, that's where they're going to be looking at having to have mortgage holidays, having discussions with their banks, because that's where they're going to struggle. And it's really interesting. CMS was a sponsor of the Real Estate Tomorrow conference last week, and we ran a poll during that as to whether people thought landlords or tenants should be taking the pain from the pandemic. And actually 65% of the people who answered said that it should be the landlords that are taking the pain. And so maybe the government have got it right. Maybe the majority of people do agree with the approach that the government has taken on this.
I think you're right, Lindsey. It is interesting. Landlords I think are unfairly seen as a sort of soft target in this, as if it is without consequences. And there is clearly a fundamental issue of those tenants who perhaps do have to pay, but are simply choosing not to for other reasons. We could talk about that at for a long time, but unfortunately we don't have much time left, which takes me to my last question, which is related to that, and it is looking at the longer term. And do you think, Lindsey, that we will see office occupiers looking to amend their contracts in light of the pandemic? And is the traditional office lease with its quarterly rental payments on the way out?
That's a very interesting question. So I think, we obviously know, we've seen in the market, there are some tenants who are looking at their portfolios already and looking across the piece. Do they need to reduce their space? Are they renegotiating with landlords and everything? I think, to be honest, right at the moment, most office tenants are actually just trying to adapt the space they have to be able to get people back into the office and obviously to comply with the guidelines. So there's a lot more work being done on that as opposed to looking more long term. So that's definitely the focus at the moment. But obviously in time, people will start to look at, as people want to work more from home, and we've seen in the survey, 60 to 80% of people generally do want to work more from home. But in terms of what the lease looks like, I definitely think that people are not going to want to sign up to 10, 15-year leases in the same way. We've seen over the emergence of the popularity in tenant breaks, the more flexibility that tenants want. So that's definitely going to be something that stays. The other thing that we've started to see, and we've started to see more with actually co-working operators, is sharing in revenue. So sharing that pain. And that's always been, a popular model in retail space and turnover leases. But actually we're starting to see it creep into offices now, where whether the landlord gets paid depends on whether the tenant is making money, making profit. Now, I have my reservations. It's started to come in. It's much more popular in the US with co-working space and flexible workspace providers. It's started to creep in here. Whether we'll quite get to that point, I'm not sure. I certainly don't think the traditional lease is dead. I think people will still want that certainty. It costs a lot of money to move offices, to fit out offices. People are not going to want to have to move all the time. But I do think with people starting to want more flexibility and not need as much space, we will move to more flexible arrangements. So tenants will want opportunity to be able to expand their space, to contract their space at very short notice as their staff decide what they want to do. So that's where I think, if they can weather the short-term storm, longer term, I think these flex great potential there for them. My last point is, I completely agree with you, Richard. The office is not dead. We are not going to see people wanting to work from home 100% of the time. There's nothing like being in the office with your colleagues, having a coffee around the coffee point, bumping into one another, having those conversations, popping out for lunch with your colleagues. I really believe that we're still going to be here in 5-10 years' time. We may even look back on this period and think, why did we ever think things were going to change that dramatically? The office will look different, and we're going to have to look at ways to make it more attractive for people to get onto the tube and the train, with all those people for all that time, to make it into the office, and what does attract them. But we are made to work together, and I do believe we're made to work in community with one another and work together face to face. And I really hope that we do over the next few months get back to that normality, and at some point be able to have the big events and the big BCA events in person that have been so popular over the years, and are really great. And I really hope that we don't lose that.
Well, I could not agree more, Lindsey, and unsurprisingly, that's been a theme in these interviews. We are social beings. We just like to be with other people. And a point I think I made in one of these discussions is that, frankly, it's more fun. Working from home has its advantages up to a point, but for most of us, it's a lot more fun being in an office with other people. It's been fascinating, Lindsey. I'm very grateful. We could have talked a lot more for a lot longer about a lot of this stuff. There's a great deal there which will need to be explored on another occasion, but sadly we are out of time. So I'm very grateful to you. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very grateful also to everyone who's watched this interview, and from Lindsey and from me, Till next time, thank you very much and goodbye.